Here I have two gas blowback M4s. Now, in and of itself, this isn't anything special. However, one of these from a UK retailer will cost about £450. The other one, again from a UK retailer based gun, will cost about £2,000. This is the Vipertech M4. The Vipertech M4 has been given a number of iconic descriptors over the years. Catgut from Explosive Enterprises described Reddit's sentiment of this as the gun that nobody owns, but everyone shills. Bada Bing from Bada Bing Pictures described this as Paul Allen's GBBR. And Waldo from Waldo Dynamics and Waldo Customs described it as a bit shit. In fairness to him, he was describing a receiver gap on his particular rifle rather than the platform itself. But he did have some issues generally, and he's not the only one. I've been told I shouldn't be such a perfectionist when making these videos, and I'm trying, but that intro did take me about 2 weeks. So, what is a Vipertech M4? From a historical perspective, you can say that it's accurate to claim that it is a Western Arms derivative, because it was originally an OEM for Inokatsu, Western Arms, etc., all that kind of thing. However, nowadays, these have had so many iterations, the Vipertech in particular, that it's more accurate to say that it's simply a gas blowback M4 that seeks to replicate the original system of the M4 carbine, rather than making a lot of concessions to Airsoft design. And the Marui is actually an excellent example of this, because on the Marui we have much lower quality materials, not necessarily a bad thing, and we have some concessions related to that, like the trigger box, like the bolt catch mechanism being different to a real one, etc., etc. Whereas the Vipertech seeks to replicate the system as closely as possible, the real system as closely as possible, without those concessions. Vipertech itself is a family business run out of Taiwan. I've got some pictures here of their workshop, and it is run by a father, son and daughter, and these pictures are thanks to Global Barangay Trading Company. They went on a visit there last year, I believe it was, and got some really cool pictures showing off all of the number of receivers and all of the bits and bobs they've just got. Tons of Vipertech things lying around, and it's very cool to see what they do and how they do it. This particular one has been made for me, and that is actually the most common method of getting a Vipertech. They are actually built to order. This one in particular is an 18mm bolt set to about 1 dual muzzle velocity, with serial numbers and such that have been set by myself. For me, it's just the date that I bought it on. And what else have we got? Oh, maple leaf inner barrel and bucking. It's not generally considered to be a necessary upgrade. In fact, it's considered more of a side grade in general. But the chap that I used as the in-between between myself and Vipertech recommended this as an upgrade, and frankly, I know it's not a downgrade, so I figured, hey, it's only 30 quid, may as well. So this has some maple leaf internals. The guy I bought it from is CRW Airsoft, and this is a company that is run out of London nowadays. It used to be in China. China? Hong Kong. Hong Kong. CRW, now in the UK, and they go as a go-between for Vipertech, so you can order a Vipertech through them if you're in the UK. That being said, it is so expensive, and it is a lot cheaper if you simply message Vipertech directly on Facebook. I personally didn't want to do that simply because, one, I tried messaging them before on Facebook and they took very long to respond because they don't speak English. And two, if there were any import troubles, as there sometimes are with getting guns into the UK, I didn't want to deal with it. I wanted that to be someone else's problem. However, that being said, didn't have that problem. It sailed through. It was all good. So yeah. This one cost me quite a lot of money. It doesn't necessarily have to cost you as much money if you go to Facebook directly. It's up to you. Also worth noting with the maple leaf stuff, Catgut from Explosive Enterprises in his video, well worth a watch if you haven't already, mentioned that if you are doing a maple leaf AEG in a barrel, it is an AEG cut, then it will need crowning on the internals. If Vipertech does this, then they do it themselves. You can see it internally that it's crowned. so you don't need to worry about that either. Right, let's start looking at this particular gun. We'll start with the surface finish of the receiver. I am very much a fan of what we got going on here. In terms of the material itself, I'm saying in terms of, I apologise. I'll try and use some other words. In terms of the metal involved, this is 6061 forged aluminium T6 and with type 3 hardcoat anodizing. That doesn't mean a whole lot to most people. It certainly doesn't mean a lot to me. 6061 is simply a spec of aluminium, you know, this percentage of this percentage of that. It just specs out the alloy. Forged means it is a block of metal that then gets two big molds and then goes clonk. Does it twice actually to then get it into the rough shape of the receiver, and then a CNC machine bores out the stuff that it needs, like the magazine well, like the cavity for the fire control group, and the in terms for the bolt as well, for the movement, the bit that the bolt moves in, the cavity for the bolt in the upper receiver. Forging is considered good because it moves the grain of the metal in line with the form of what it's going to be, and therefore it makes it a little bit stronger. It's certainly a lot stronger than if it was a cast receiver, as is common with Airsoft. T6 is just a spec of heat treatment, is considered to be very good, and Type 3 hardcoat anodizing is the same as a military M4. 6061 aluminium is not the same as a military M4, but it is the same as a few civilian AR-15s, the lower grade ones. If you were to look at a Colt or a Knights Armament AR-15, then it would be 7075 aluminium. Even 6061 is completely overkill for Airsoft, so it's a complete non-issue. The surface finish that I have here on this one is absolutely fantastic. I am very happy with it indeed. I was actually a little bit nervous when I bought this and waiting for it to be produced. This actually took me from paying the money to having the gun 3 months. For me, it usually is a bit less than that, but mine took longer for some reason. 3 months for me. I'm very happy with it, but I was nervous when getting it, when leading up to it, because, again, going back to Catguy from Explosive Enterprises, he did a review of one of the Vipertech VFC M733s, I believe it was, and he showed off the VFC receiver finish and said, hey, it's a good match for forged receivers. I am personally not a fan of the VFC receiver finish. To my eyes at least, it is very heavily pink and it is very heavily green, I believe it is. I've had VFC ARs in the past and I really wasn't a fan of the sparkly finish to them. This, however, completely different to me, to my eyes at least. People say that I'm getting a bit particular with that kind of thing, but if I didn't care about the VFC receiver finish, then I would own a VFC rather than what we have here. And this is so much more expensive. So yeah, the VFC receiver finish, I'm not a fan of it, but I was told that that is what a forged receiver looks like. I'm very glad that this particular one looks nothing like that at all. In terms of your alignment, your receiver gaps, or any kind of issues there, any typos in the markings, mine, from what I can tell, is absolutely perfect. We have no alignment issues in our lines. We have no perceived. We have no receiver gap here. If we were to hold this up to the light, oh god, there's maybe a tiny gap, under 1 millimeter. And this is absolutely necessary because it has to then lever open, of course. Mine appears to be, in that regard, absolutely perfect. However, I do have a gouge on the underside of the channel where my charging handle goes, because my charging handle had a defect. And this is not the first charging handle it has had. Initially, the pin that holds the latch in, it was walking out. Let's actually check. Are we walking out here as well? No. It walked out upwards. And so the bolt was getting stuck forward when charging manually. And it took me a little while to figure out what was going on here. And in that time, we have a slight gouge in the receiver in a very difficult to see place. So I'm not too worried. That sound makes me happy. Replacement charging handle sent to me for free by CRW. If I had not bought from CRW and had instead bought from Vipertech, then they almost definitely would have sent me a free charging handle as well. in terms of our bits and bobs, we have a dust cover that is blue steel and it fits. I've seen issues from people way in the past now, I think, where the charging handle doesn't fit. Here it fits. Our bolt release does not impact at all with the receiver. On some guns it does. On the Marui, if you whack the bolt release, then yes, you can get a slight mark, but of course it's Cerakote, so who cares. On the Nova up there actually, so that is a Nova MWS, that will just impact the receiver, and so there's actually quite a noticeable mark on there. However, here we are perfectly toleranced. Magazine catch was initially a bit stiff, but it's now absolutely perfect, and this was initially because of the magazine pressing up into the bolt. It does still press up into the bolt, but it was this force of being held up in there and being squished against the gas router that was causing that excess friction in the magazine catch. However, now we are not experiencing that at all. Fantastic. Safety catch. This was initially a bit stiff, now it isn't. Sorted. Other controls, I think we're all good in that regard. The stock is stock, and I realise now it's actually not stock because I put some Velcro on the inside of the stock tube. The reason for this is because by standard it was a bit wobbly. It was quite wobbly. I'm intending to swap this out, but I did want to keep it on here for the video just to show what it comes with as standard. This is of course a Vipertech M4A1. We'll go back quickly to the magazine release and the mag being pushed up into the bolt. There's actually nothing stopping the Vipertech mag from going too far up. So we'll take the magazine out, we'll lock the bolt to the rear, and we will insert a magazine with some panache. So you may be able to see here that the magazine catch is actually still depressed, as if the magazine has not been inserted fully. However, what I'll do, I'll pop it here, pop it like that, and I'll let go of the magazine, and we can see that it actually drops down. Not a major deal, but we can see with the bolt lock to the rear, I can push, and I'm hoping you can actually hear that on the mic. We can see how much the magazine comes up. Now if I release the bolt, now push up, there is no movement there whatsoever. What this means is that if I am firing with the weapon rested on its magazine, then when the bolt comes to the rear, the magazine will come up relative to the bolt. Rather, the weapon will come down due to gravity ever so slightly. What can happen, or what I expect can happen, because I haven't seen this directly. I've seen gouged routers, but I don't know that they are caused by this. So the nozzle will come over, and because the router is sitting higher, it will go clunk, and every little time you fire, it will go clunk, 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 and it will start to gouge that surface. I do not know for certain that this is a problem. I do know for certain that it is not present on other designs. So, take our Marui, lock the bolt to the rear. One, we'll insert it with a bit of passion, and we can see that it is fine. The the magazine release is perfectly, normal. Nothing happened there. And with our bolt lock to the rear, we'll push on the magazine, and there is no movement there whatsoever. Our movement that comes from noise is actually from moving the magazine forward and backward rather than up or down. This Marui system does stop the magazine from over-inserting, either in this situation or when the bolt is coming back to the rear when firing, and therefore there is no problem at all with firing while resting on the magazine. However, with the Vipertech, I would not be willing to do that with the lack of over-insertion protection that it seems to have a trouble with. So that is an unexpected shortfall of the Vipertech system. However, in terms of actually firing it, it feels very nice indeed. The recoil out of the box, I was actually quite underwhelmed by it, but this is largely because of the standard buffer. This is very, very light, and there's nothing in it. It's hollow. It is just a hollow aluminium buffer that looks like a real one, but isn't. This one is from a GHK. It doesn't shift when you tilt it because the weight is on a spring. The fact that the weight is on a spring is kind of neither here nor there really, but it does mean that we do have bolt bounce prevention. And also it does increase the mass of the reciprocating parts, and therefore it just feels fantastic. So you're probably not going to see much. Just feels good. I can't test this one in fully automatic because this one is actually semi-locked. It is semi-locked from the factory. I do this on most rifles that I can, simply because I don't care that much about fully automatic. And if I ever do find myself going over the FPS limit for any gun on any day, then I can just say, hey, all right, it's a DMR today. That's totally fine. So I work with a minimum engagement distance. Don't shoot anyone closer than that, than whatever distance it is. And then that gives me a chance to use pistols. That's totally fine by me. On the subject of things being DMRs or not, look at this VFC G3. I sold my G3 a while ago and regretted it ever since. Now I have this one, but look at the color matching for you can tell what's real and what's not. So future plans. Also, Hensel scope, genuine. Ooh. So, moving forward of our bits and bobs, we have the handguard. This is a reproduction of the Knight's Armament RAS. And it is an okay reproduction. I wouldn't say it's majorly good, but it's alright. The handguard is not chamfered, however I don't have a real Knight's Armament handguard to compare to. If this was Daniel Defense, a RIS 2, then I would know this is wrong by the feel of it, because on the real RIS 2, all of these edges are softened out to prevent tearing up your gloves, tearing up your hands, etc. Peck, obviously that doesn't come with the gun. Panel, this doesn't come with the gun. This is actually a genuine panel. The lower handguard of this wobbles a lot by standard, and there's a big left and right, it just flaps in the breeze. Not good tolerancing there at all. I was very surprised by that from Vipertech. However, what I've done here is put a little sheet of neoprene rubber up the top there to keep everything tense, and therefore it is now all good and solid. Good stuff. Alternatively, you could of course mount a M203, but what I've found, no, not what I've found, it is early days for me with fitting M203s and caring about that kind of thing. So for me personally, I haven't found a working solution that keeps everything properly tight, even though I have a G&P M203 with a tensioner inside it that should keep it tight. I haven't found a working solution for that yet, but I haven't properly tried yet. The process of getting the lower handguard off, or any of these handguards off, you've got to push down on this ring. This spring is too tight. The spring is too strong. You can't do it. That's not going to move. You need a tool. Let's look at the tool. This is the tool. There are different tools you can get. However, ideally you want one with really thick rods, because I've thrown out the other one actually. If you have any thinner than this, then it will just strip away the rubber immediately, and it will go down to the steel that's inside it, and then the steel that is inside it will gouge out the aluminium of the nut. To use one of these tools is very simple. We simply take the magazine out, we put the tool up so the rods are in there and where they should be, and so that the lip is in the magazine well. Then we crunch these together with as much force as we can, and then we will push down, which will push the nut down with minimal damage to your nut. However, it's worth noting that even with an entirely rubber system like this, where there is very, very thick rubber over the steel, even that, because you are necessarily applying so much pressure to the nut, it will deform the nut over time, because the spring is so stiff. You can get replacement springs if you want. Probably. A real spring will be less strong than this, because this is ridiculous. Moving forward of the handguard, we have our front sight post. Now this is steel on this, whereas it is not on the Marine. Same for the barrel, same for quite a lot of things actually. I'm a fan of it, but the pins, I was mistaken on which way the pins go out. They do go only one way, which is perfectly common, perfectly normal. But because of a casting defect in one of them, it made it look like that was the correct way to go through, whereas it clearly wasn't. And so I've actually tried to knock it through to get the front sight base off, and I was not successful in doing so. I'm going to keep trying, but first I need to look at getting the barrel nut off. And the barrel nut, it's not Loctited, but it is machine tightened to a very, very high spec. I believe it is about 80 foot-pounds of torque, which is, it's high. It's very high, and it's too high for most methods. However, I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to give it another go, actually, and see what I can do, because I would quite like to convert this to an M4A1 SOP mod Block 2, that is my favourite type of M4, but it has been quite difficult to do so up to this point, because everything is so tight, and everything is built to a very tight spec. So, handguard, front sight base. We've covered the barrel very quickly, but as you can see, it is manganese phosphate coated steel, otherwise known as Parkerizing. Parkerize is kind of a brand name kind of thing. It's just, yeah, it's your grey type of steel. It doesn't innately have any protection against surface rust. Ask me how I know, northeast to Z. But phosphating does do a very good job of soaking up oil, which in turn gives it good protection against surface rust. Then we have a crush washer over an O-ring and our muzzle device. This is actually not the standard muzzle device, and it is not not the standard muzzle device. This is the VFC muzzle device, which is also manganese phosphate coated steel, so everything matches, everything is perfect. And it does also give us the ability to mount a VFC NT4 if we wish. So this particular Vipertech is currently threaded to 14mm counterclockwise. However, that is not necessarily always the case. With these barrels, there is actually an insert that goes into them, which then has your relevant muzzle threading. For this particular one, of course, again, it is 14mm counterclockwise. However, you can have it, 1/2 in 28 right hand or whatever it's called, the same muzzle threading as a real one if you wish. Personally, I don't care, because all of my stuff is Airsoft spec anyway, and so that's totally fine that it can't take real muzzle devices, which is good because they actually forgot to send the real insert anyway. They did send the proper muzzle device. It's in a weird angle at the moment, but it is much like the A2 birdcage we have here. However, it is an earlier version that does not have the cutout for the NT4. So we would not be able to mount the NT4 suppressor on the Vipertech muzzle device by standard. So that is what we've got for externals. Everything is steel that should be steel, everything is aluminium that should be aluminium, and all of our surface coatings and such are what they should be. It's an M4. You know, it feels like an M4. Now that I've got the handguard solidified with that extra rubber, it just feels fantastic. Same for the stock as well, that needed a bit of padding out. And yeah, it does feel very solid. I've heard people say that it makes other guns, like the Marui, feel like a toy. I think it's not a good idea to be devaluing what you have based on what you have. You know, I don't think things should maybe work that way. Choose happiness, right? But you do notice the weight balance difference, especially from the lack of the steel barrel. And you only really notice this when doing it side by side with something that does have a steel barrel. If you bought a Marui, you would be happy. And I know this because I bought a Marui. When did I buy this? 2021 I bought this in, and I'm perfectly happy with it. I've been perfectly happy with it up to this point. Of course, if I compare them side by side, then yes, the £2,000 rifle is going to make the £450 rifle look a bit cheap, because this is more expensive. It's one of those things. We do have many differences in how it feels. Things like the spring strengths are different, the trigger feels different, very different. The charging handle feels different because the recoil spring is much stiffer on the Vipertech. The bolt release sounds different. Let's do the bolt release on the Marui. And now let's do the bolt release on the Vipertech. The Vipertech puts the Marui to shame. Puts the Marui to absolute shame, but this is trying to be effective and reliable over a very long period of time while using cheaper materials that bring it down to the price point that it is at. This does not have to go to the price point that this is at, and therefore this gets the longevity that this does by using much higher grade materials. This does a fantastic job of doing what it does. This does a fantastic job of doing what it does. So in terms of feel of using this, well, the magazine catch we've talked about already. It just smooths out over time and feels good. The trigger is a 2-stage, and it blows anything airsoft that I've tried out of the water. But in terms of comparing it to real guns, it's not that good in my opinion. So we have our 2-stage. So we come up to the wall and then we push through, and the brake is noticeably stepped back from the wall, and then we'll come back, and there is a separate brake on the reset actually. There it is. So now I'm hoping the mic can pick that up as well, that we get to a physical wall when resetting. There we go. And then we have to start the whole system, the whole trigger pull again, going back to the wall and then pushing through. Like I say, anything airsoft, it blows it out of the water. But comparing it to the real triggers that I've tried, I don't think this is very good. I haven't tried a real M4 or frankly AR-15 trigger in so long by this point. In probably over 10 years. That maybe this feels just like a real M4 trigger. I don't have a real point of reference for you there, I apologise. Comparing it to a real SA-80 though, the SA-80 feels miles better. It's so much better than this. This is like so much heavier, it is spongier, it's again the brake being set back so far from the wall is very, very different to the SA-80. Again, it blows anything airsoft out of the water, let's be clear about that. This is an airsoft gun, this is the best airsoft trigger I've ever used. Airsoft rifle trigger I've ever used, because pistols are a bit different. When you get into that comparison against real guns, it doesn't hold up as well as I was expecting from what I've heard. I've also heard people describe this as breaking glass. So the brake feeling like breaking glass, I absolutely do not feel that here. The fact, again, that the brake is set back so far from the wall, that's not there. And the sensation of breaking glass with a real trigger, thinking of, so guns that I've used real triggers on that feel like breaking glass. The SA-80, not really the MP5. The L115A3 sniper rifle, absolutely. Things like that, yes, you get the dunk, and you get that shock through your finger that feels like breaking glass. That's not this, absolutely not. But again, blows anything airsoft out of the water, so good job. When we do pull the trigger, the bolt comes to the rear, however, it does not come back all the way. The Vipertech is short strokes by default. This does not have a valve knocker lock, which means that as the gun fires, we'll fire the gun, we can come under and see that the valve knocker has come forward and would hit the valve knocker, the output valve on the back of the magazine. However, when we start to pull back, we immediately start doing that with a single finger is painful. When you pull the bolt to the rear, we immediately see the valve knocker retract back into the gas firing pin assembly. What this means is that as soon as the gun fires and the bolt starts coming back to the rear, we immediately start letting off gas. If we were to take our VFC G3 here, which comes standard with a valve knocker lock, we will pull the trigger on our empty magazine after clearing the chamber, and we will come under and we will see our gas firing pin. However, when we start bringing the bolt to the rear, we see that it is locked, locked, locked. It is not moving until there. And then it goes bing. So we can see that the valve knocker is held against the magazine until the bolt is like halfway through its travel. That's not the case with the Vipertech. With the Vipertech, as soon as we start getting bolt cycle, we start losing gas pressure in the chamber of the nozzle. Not in the chamber itself, but in the chamber of the bolt where we are expanding. So, with that being said, we are losing pressure as soon as we move through here. What that means is that if you have the bolt at its full travel, where it can go all the way back, By the time it's got that far back, it has spent so much time with not enough pressure coming from the magazine that the recoil is noticeably lessened. And so you can actually start having issues there as well, where it will not get to full bolt lock on an empty magazine. So the Vipertech gets around this by short stroking, and it feels a lot better as a result. The recoil of this, as I've mentioned earlier, it is very underwhelming initially because of the light bolt that's still light buffer, that is still on the floor. However, putting a GHK buffer into this, it is a 113 gram buffer. I think it's 3 ounce. It has a disproportionately good improvement over the recoil feel compared to the Marui. If I put that buffer in the Marui, it would feel, 8 out of 10, sure. If I put that same buffer in the Vipertech with the same gas, same temperature, same everything, it's like a 9 or 10 out of 10, right? 10 out of 10 is a bit much, but it feels good. And it feels better with this in this than it does with that in that. You get what I mean. Unlike a lot of guns, the Vipertech is designed to be short stroked, obviously. The way it does this is by having an extra cutout in the bolt in order for it to get to bolt lock even at this shorter stroke of travel. There. If we were to short stroke a Marui, by standard, I will hold down the bolt lock and I will bring the bolt to the rear to the same place that the Vipertech would. And I'm holding down the bolt release all the way, and there's nothing there. That's not going to happen because there is no cutout in the bolt to do that. Whereas if I bring it back all the way, there is our lock. By standard, you cannot short stroke a Marui or any other system unless you make allowances for that lock back on an empty magazine. It's the same for pistols. Don't short stroke your damn pistol to the point where it can't lock back, because then it can't lock back. Please stop short stroking your damn high cappers and then complaining that the slide lock doesn't work. Not relevant to this video. With the Marui, for example, you can get a shorter Z plate. So the Z plate is the locking plate, one of the concessions to Airsoft design, that come up, and then that is short stroked. You can get short stroke for that. You can do short stroking that way. And then that allows it to lock at a shorter stroke. But then you can stop it. Short stroking a gun comes in 2 steps. 1, you stop the reciprocating parts at a certain point, which is earlier than it otherwise would be. And 2, you allow the gun to lock back at that earlier point on an empty magazine. So for short stroking a Marui, for example, we pack out the back of the buffer tube so that the bolt can't travel as far, and we put in a Z plate that has short stroke allowances to get that bolt lock. On the Vipertech, this is already done for us for the most part. However, when I received this, and I've heard of other people having this same issue, where if you pull the bolt all the way back to the rear where it is locked and then keep pulling, it can go a bit too far. And the material for the full travel bolt lock actually starts interacting with the bolt lock lever and pushes it down. This results in unreliability in bolt locking in the short strokes position because it is slamming that lever down. So for me, what I did, and for what seems to be the common solution, is to pack out the buffer tube just a little bit more so the bolt actually cannot travel so far back that the full travel material is interacting with the bolt lock position, with the bolt lock lever. And therefore we have our reliable lock back. So we'll do that here. So this is a full magazine of gas. I will pull the trigger and I have 100% certainty that even on its max power, it is going to lock back. Perfect. I forgot to mention, by the way, in comparing the Vipertech trigger to the Marui trigger, obviously I did mention that the Vipertech is the best rifle trigger that I've ever had, and so therefore it's kind of a given that it's going to be better than the Marui. But the issue with the Marui is that through the trigger's travel, it hitches, and we have those points of friction. Even after using oil, even after trying to, I've seen people try to polish these surfaces in here, even though they are zinc alloy, and yeah, you just get these hitches through this travel. Do it that way. Hitch, hitch, hitch until the break. This is a lighter trigger than the Vipertech, but yeah, this hitches, That doesn't. This is perfectly smooth all the way through. And yeah, the Marui is still a fantastic gun though, overall. It's just maybe not to the level of something that is 4 times the price. So, in terms of using it and shooting it, one thing that was very surprising and disappointing? Maybe not quite the word. Hop adjustment. The hop adjustment for this, so the hop up is actually, I'm so impressed with it from the shooting that I've done. But the hop adjustment is on the barrel in here. On the Marui, it's up here, you just lock the bolt to the rear, give it a finger, and it's fine. Here, you have to remove this lower handguard, and I've showed you how difficult that is, and you have to do it in order to get to the hop adjust. This is one of the reasons, one of the many reasons that I want to convert this to an M4A1 Block 2 with that RIS system, because we'll then have holes under here, and I'm hoping that I can fashion a tool or something to do the hop adjust without removing the lower handguard portion. 2 things. One, once you do adjust the hop, it's absolutely amazing. The hop consistency and hop performance is the best out of the box gun that I've ever used by far. And my super amazing, absolutely perfect Marui setup, which is just the Lilac strike arm. You don't need anything else for accuracy in a Marui. Don't bother. That is equal to this. And yeah, 10 out of 10 hop performance from this. I'm really happy with it. However, if you don't like the method of adjustment, there is also the Meech hop. So Meech is a engineering type chap who is very active in the Vipertech community. Both Meech and Guillotine are very good names to keep an eye out for in the Vipertech community. GuillotineAirsoft.com is a good website to be on, as well as, of course, Heavy Recoil Club, where they put all their developments. The Meech hop has the ability, if you want that option, to be rear adjust through the chamber. And this will, if you are in a position where you cannot get to the hop under the barrel, then having this hop will allow you to adjust it from the rear. It does have a few other improvements as well for indexing and barrel and bucking compatibility. That's a whole thing though. Have a look on Guillotine Airsoft for the Meech hop, MEACH. Have a read up on that if you are interested in upgrading your Vipertech in that particular way. Let's cover an example. If I wanted to create a Mark 12 Mod 0 like this, I would have absolutely no way to do it at present on the stock hop of a Vipertech, because on here the hop adjust would be about here, and the nearest hole is up here. You couldn't do that. This hop is too stiff to adjust. You wouldn't be able to thread in there and do that. So if you wanted to do a Mark 12 Mod 0, as an example, on the Vipertech platform, then really your only option is to get a rear adjust hop, and the only decent rear adjust hop around is the Meech hop. There is the TNT setup as well, however this is not considered to be good. Also worth noting for Guillotine Airsoft in particular, he has a lot of other kind of little spare parts like your E-clips and bits and bobs. It's, if you want to buy a Vipertech, then have a look at Guillotine Airsoft just to have an idea of what kind of replacements are easily available from a store rather than messaging on Facebook, because he really does make the process very simple. Magazines. I only have 1 magazine for this because the whole gun is in its break-in period. For Vipertechs, for the first approximately 2,000 to 5,000 rounds, we have the gun is sorting out its own tolerancing, basically. We have the friction of the parts working against the surface finish of those parts, and it is all essentially self-polishing over time. For that reason, there's not a lot of point in gaming it at this point, because it is going to suffer reliability issues. We know this, and we know that these are going to even out over time. So, while that's the case, I only have 1 magazine, and this is an EB-Tech CNC Light Stanag magazine. People have done a few different things with these. The main ones appear to be either using them with GHK magazines or VFC magazines. I, in this format, cannot do justice to the conversion processes and the small incompatibilities that arise from using these magazines. So instead, I would direct you to Catgut and Explosive Enterprises video on improving the Vipertech. It was I believe it was part 2 that covered magazine conversions. because the GHK has a few different spring issues, and the VFC has some measurement issues that require some particular filing of your lower receiver, and a couple of other bits and bobs as well. Myself, however, I am simply using it with the magazine that came with it. I am taking it slow, and my intention is almost definitely to simply get more EBTech magazines, just over a very long period of time. I'm not in a rush, and so that should be fine for me. To mention Catgut's perception of the magazine compatibility also requires mentioning Waldo's perspective of magazine compatibility, because he really wasn't a fan of the fact that you have to go through these processes to get working magazines. And I don't think he's wrong in that. However, I don't believe the magazine that he had was the EBTech. I believe that his was the Vipertech. I think I've left one of my red dot sights on over there. And yeah, so I'm not experiencing the issues that he did. Also, I'm using BLS BBs, whereas he was using some Bios and some other brands. So I'm not experiencing the issues that he did personally. That being said, you are absolutely welcome to have a negative opinion of this gun's magazine compatibility, because the magazine does make the gun when it comes to gas blowback rifles. However, if we take the Marui once again, as long as you buy Marui mags, you are absolutely fine. If we take the Vipertech once again, as long as you buy EBTechs, you are absolutely fine. Straying from either of these can have problems. The Tokyo Marui derivatives, the magazines can have issues, like quite a lot of them. And it is the same for the Vipertech. It's the same for pretty much everything, I think, that if you go for brands that aren't the well-known ones, well, not even that. If you go for this handguard isn't chamfered either. If you go for brands outside of the fundamental, what's it called? The established, the established working magazines, then yes, of course you're going to have issues. The weirdness with the Vipertech, however, is that the Vipertech magazine for the Vipertech gun is not an establishedly good magazine. Yes, that is strange. Absolutely. I don't think there's any defending Vipertech in that fact. For me though, I'm sticking with the EBTech because that is what is known to work, and it has had a single range day so far, and it did really, really well. Until it didn't. So as I mentioned, we're in the break-in phase and we are expecting some reliability issues, and sure enough, there was one point in time where I had a misfeed. So what happened was, fired the weapon, the bolt comes to the rear, comes forward, and then at some, either when coming back, a BB popped out of the feed lips into the chamber, or more likely, when coming forward, the nozzle loading arm took a BB out of the magazine, attempted to load it all the way into the bucking, and got stuck. And it got stuck before the bolt was all the way forward. So it got stuck like that, essentially. However, the Vipertech does not have an out-of-battery safety mechanism. So if I pull the bolt to the rear like this, and then take the safety off, and then pull the trigger, the weapon fires. If you do this on a gas blowback rifle, then your nozzle aperture for your gas router is not lined up at all. And therefore, it will never get to a point where gas is being fed into the bolt, and therefore it will never cycle, but it will just keep on spewing gas out of this magazine at about 160 to 180 psi, assuming that we're using a green gas magazine. So this is what happened to me. When this happened, all of the surface finish that we were talking about earlier, with the friction and rubbing off those surface finishes in the process of self-polishing, all of that is coating the insides of this because it's been firing for quite a while, and that pressure just pushes all of that gunk everywhere, including down the barrel. Once it had done this, the accuracy just went off a cliff. Because of all that gunk down the barrel, it really, really affected the weapon's accuracy and hop consistency, as well as the total hop ability. This is something, so that particular, I wasn't expecting that to happen. I wasn't expecting to have that knock-on effect, but I was expecting reliability issues in this initial phase. It is a little bit unfortunate, but now it has been cleaned and so it should be fine. The method in which I cleaned it is covered again in another Catgut Explosive Enterprises video. You should really subscribe to Explosive Enterprises if you have any technical curiosity towards gas blowback rifles at all. But he has a video on how to clean a gas blowback rifle involving a bit of paracord with a few knots in, just thread it through the barrel. He explains it all, it's super simple, and now I have a clean inner barrel once again. Thank you, Catgut. And yeah, so I used the inner bit of the paracord just because my paracord itself wasn't the correct size to fit through the barrel. And when I looked at the cords of paracord that came out of it, I could see all of that anodizing gunk from it. And so, yeah, I firmly believe that that is what has happened and that is what has affected my accuracy. And I believe the gun to now be fine once again. Up to that point though, I was, as mentioned, I was very, very impressed with the gun and the accuracy and I could say the efficiency, gas per shot, etc. The ability to get through a magazine. However, I don't think I'm at a point yet where I can comment on that properly because the temperature was like 25, 26 degrees Celsius and the vast majority of guns are going to be totally fine when doing that. So it's not really a good judge of a gun's ability to get through a magazine when you're testing at that temperature. Overall though, I am very, very happy with this. I recognise when writing the notes for this and when talking about it, that I've said quite a lot of negative things about the gun. And going back to Waldo's review, I think he has a valid point that if you spend so much money on this, then you can't be blamed too much for expecting perfection. That's not what this is, especially in its wearing in period. So it really depends on your priorities of what you appreciate. Because personally, I'm very much a fan of the fact that this is, you know, the relevant parts of aluminium, the relevant parts of steel, the relevant parts of manganese phosphate coated, the relevant parts of Type 3 hardcoat anodizing, etc, etc, etc. I very much appreciate all of that stuff being done right, and I appreciate a manufacturer prioritizing that to the same level of particularity that I do. If we take the Marui again, for example, I'm just beating on this poor thing today. So, in terms of parts I have used up, oh, that was it. So the charging handle latch, I've gone through one of these because that is pot metal, whereas on the real one it is steel. On the Vipertech it is steel. So I've broken one of those just through using it over and over again. Same for a selector lever actually. I have broken one of these pot metal selector levers just from using it too much. I've just gone through it.
Yep, that'll do it.
On the Vipertech, it's steel. I'm never going to go through this. Never at all. All of these little things to me add up to something that I believed to be worth buying. I don't have any regrets yet, but this is very much a first impressions type thing. I've only had this for a month. I've only had this to a single range day. I don't even have 1,000 rounds on it yet, so I don't have enough of an opinion to base an opinion off of. You get what I mean. I don't have enough experience to really make an opinion out of. That being said, so far, no regrets. Future plans are to turn it into a Block 2. The cost is prohibitive and it is so much money, but you can bring the cost down if you message them on Facebook, message Vipertech directly on Facebook. However, if you have any import trouble, then of course that is on you to resolve. These are of course perfectly legal, however, and so in theory they should be resolvable. Also, fun point, this Martech rear sight reproduction is actually from Tokyo Marui, and it has given up the ghost somewhat with regards to the Vipertech recoil. So, that is the Vipertech M4. I am, of course, intending to make more videos on this as its story continues, but yes, this is its first impressions. I'm really happy with it so far, no regrets, no surprises. Happy days. Thanks for watching.